Hello, everyone. So today I'm here with Dr. Kasey, and I'm so excited to have her because she's one of the doctors that talks about EBV, Lyme, and mold, and she actually specializes in it. I've never met a doctor that actually specializes in these three sort of infections. So thank you for being here, and I would love to have you share your story and why you got into learning about these infections and really being like an expert in this field.
Well, thanks for having me, Sweta. I'm happy to share my story. It's kind of a lot like many of yours, probably, where you're looking for answers to your health. I never intended to. I didn't go to school to be an EBV or mold or Lyme specialist. It kind of chose me. But when I was 10, I had a really bad case of mono, which is caused by Epstein-Barr virus, but that's what we commonly think of it as, is mono, the kissing disease. It's common for people to get it when they're young or maybe in high school or college. My case was pretty severe. I was out of school for 3 months, and the doctors weren't really sure why I was so sick. It was just kind of like, oh, you're just different. Oh, you're just different. And, you know, it was like I always had health problems after that, and never really had full energy, but I was functioning. I had worked with a naturopathic doctor. He had helped me tremendously with gastrointestinal health, and I chose to go into this field. And fast forward, I was in naturopathic medical school and I started to get really sick again. And when we look at how doctors are trained with EBV, there's a lot of research coming out on how it's linked to autoimmune conditions and all different sorts of things, but it hasn't really translated into how we test for people or how we screen for people or what the standard of care is. So that hasn't really transferred it into, even for naturopathic doctors. It's not really standard for us to do a full EBV panel or whatnot. So nobody really had any answers for me, but I kept thinking that my EBV, I kept saying, I just feel like I have EBV again. And they would say, well, that doesn't really happen very often. It's probably just school. You're probably just stressed. So then I started to have patients while I was a student. We have rotations and we're working underneath another doctor, and people would feel the way that I would, and some of them had EBV panels and they were positive, and I was like, there's more to this, So it continued to pique my interest. And then when I started working after I graduated, I was in Georgia, and I saw the same thing. I got to work at a clinic where we ran viral panels very commonly on people, as well as stool tests. It was a full functional medicine workup. So I finally got to see some of the data that I had been wanting to see. Excuse me, my little headpiece. And I started seeing the pattern, but I got really sick in Georgia due to mold exposure. But I thought it was just EBV, and I didn't realize it was mold. So then I started to understand how mold and EBV are related, how Lyme and EBV are related. And it just really opened up my eyes to how complex this is. And I saw a lot of people that would have one of these or all three of them. Some would get better, some wouldn't. So I really dialed in on the foundations of what is needed. And that's just been what I've been doing ever since. So that was kind of a long, a long story, but that's how I got here.
That's incredible. I mean, when I got tested for EBV, it was 2 years ago, and they did like 4 different tests to see if like I had it in the past, if I have it now. And they also did the HHV6 test because that infection is part of the EBV family. Do you suggest the same labs, or like if someone wants to get tested, what do you suggest?
Yeah, so the nice thing about getting tested for EBV is you don't need a functional lab panel. As long as your doctor works with you, you can do a simple blood draw. And usually the 4 labs, which I think you're talking about, is the full panel, which has viral capsid antigen IgM. Now that's your body's first response. So that usually only shows positive the first time that you get it, usually. But I've learned this year, I had people sending me their labs saying, I've had this IgM positive and then I've had it positive again. So sometimes, whereas there's so much that we need to learn about our immune system. And I've learned that just from people reaching out to me and being like, but look at my labs. And it's like, oh, okay. So that can be positive again. We have viral capsid antigen IgG, which is the one that is usually positive and will stay positive throughout life. But when you look at the titers, and a lot of people that are dealing with a heavy viral load, the titers will be really high, like above 600. So when we see that and we hear that you're tired and you have the symptoms, we have to kind of consider that. Then there's another one that really helps with understanding if you're actually in a reactivation state, and that's the early antigen IgG. And so that usually stays positive for about 3 to 6 months. Again, usually I've seen it stay positive longer. And then there's the nuclear antigen IgG. So viral capsid antigen, nuclear antigen, basically they're just checking for different responses to different pieces of the virus. And there is some research showing that those markers sometimes indicate how severe your symptoms can be. There's some correlations with that. But again, that piece of the puzzle is still being, we need more information about it. But that's a full EBV panel, and that gives us some good understanding of what's really going on. Other common labs that are done are, like you're saying, other herpes family viruses. There are people that a lot of times will have outbreaks. I've heard people having outbreaks of chickenpox or HSV1, HSV2, because it's from that same viral family. So when you have the EBV going on, it's just like your viral bucket is full and you have all this to deal with. And another common one that they will test is CMV, cytomegalovirus. And so those are all commonly run, but those 4 are the standard for a complete EBV panel.
Wow. And yeah, I mean, those were the ones that I did. And even when I felt like I got rid of the EBV, like it was no longer active, I still had the symptoms. Do you run into that, or is that like, was I the only one?
No, that can definitely happen. And that's where there's a lot of gray area, because we see labs have started to normalize the early antigen isn't positive, but we still see high titers and people are having symptoms, or we see people are improving, but their titers haven't changed. So understanding how the immune system is really interacting with the virus and how that's, how long it takes for the immune system to make changes can be not what is showing up on lab work.
I see. So like, when we have EBV, how do we sort of go about like upgrading our immune system with it? Because it's kind of like we want to build a stronger immune system so it tackles this virus, right? But then again, we want to also not reactivate the virus. So it seems like a catch-22 here.
Yeah, so the biggest things that I see trigger reactivation are things that cause oxidative stress in the body. And oxidative stress is what happens through just the normal aging process. But anything that is stress to the body can actually trigger oxidative stress. So that's why we see people having reactivations after big emotional stressors or physical stressors like a car accident or something like that. That really can shock your nervous system, cause things to happen. Where in oxidative stress, your body has antioxidants it tries to combat that with, but depending on what is already in your body, that might have been something that was too much or pushed your body to a place where you can't keep that virus in a latent state, because that's what we want, is Epstein-Barr virus in a latent state where it's not actively replicating or causing problems. So other things that can cause oxidative stress are other infections like Lyme. That's why EBV and Lyme go together so often. Mold, toxins, pesticides. It's really interesting. We see glyphosate and how that's linked to cancers and lymphoma, and Epstein-Barr virus is linked to lymphoma. So is it that this virus is causing all these things, or is it that the toxins that we've been exposed to have triggered us to not be able to keep a virus that is pretty common? It's in over 90% of people, and then the body isn't able to keep that in a latent state, and then that also is turning on pathways of inflammation that can cause autoimmune conditions. So then you have this snowball effect. So we got to look at oxidative stress, and we got to try and decrease that as much as possible. And there's foundational things, right? So gastrointestinal health is huge. If you're having intestinal permeability or leaky gut and food sensitivities, and there's that constant immune activity there, your immune system isn't going to be functioning properly. You have something called secretory IgA that lines your gastrointestinal tract, and it's the first line mucous membrane there over your enterocytes. It goes all the way up to your esophagus. So if you constantly are dealing with an immune response there and that secretory IgA is worn out, then your immune system is really, really kind of struggling there. So that's important. Having your detox pathways open and working so that you can get toxins out and decrease oxidative stress is really important. People always say, how often do you need to detox? And I say daily, because there's toxins everywhere. So that kind of becomes a daily thing. And then specifics, when we look at autoimmune conditions and we look at Epstein-Barr virus, there's a lot to do with vitamin D. So vitamin D and autoimmune conditions, low vitamin D is pretty much associated with higher risk of several different autoimmune conditions. And vitamin D is a really big piece of the immune system. So you got to make sure that those levels are supported and are where they need to be. And then we have to consider things like your hormones and your thyroid and your adrenals. A lot of people don't realize that when you wake up in the morning and you either wake up and you feel ready to go or you don't. And most of people with EBV don't wake up feeling ready to go. But that morning wake up is your morning cortisol spike. And if that's not happening and your adrenals are worn out, the other thing that doesn't happen is your thymus isn't filtering immune cells and functioning optimally. So if your adrenals are wore out, we also have where your immune system isn't as optimal. So there's all those things that go way beyond just getting rid of the bugs, right? We always think we want to kill the EBV, kill the Lyme, but all those pieces are really important. So all of them together are what's going to make a healthy immune system.
I totally agree. I mean, even when I found out I had EBV, I actually found out my adrenals were pretty shot as well.
Yeah.
So I didn't know, what to fix first, but usually I used olive oil extract to try to get rid of the EBV and some other herbs, but somehow the EBV was gone, and I had felt these symptoms and found out that, my adrenals are pretty taxed and I need to do something about this. So I think you're right. Like, everything does work together, and without your hormones being balanced, I think you'll have a really hard time trying to get anything to work in your body. And so when it comes to supplements, do you see that usually it fixes the issue, or is there something more that's missing?
Yeah, so I think that supplements, when it comes to dealing with Epstein-Barr virus and autoimmune conditions, can be really helpful when they're used effectively. The problem is that you kind of have to be doing all the things at once to make a dent and get your energy back. So sometimes that feels like a lot of supplements. The other thing is that there are other things outside of supplements that have to be in place. So when we talk about decreasing oxidative stress and boosting antioxidants, a key component of that is diet. And I mean, I'm sure that you guys talk about that a lot here. And with Hashimoto's, there's a high correlation with gluten and celiac there. So you guys are probably already eating pretty clean. But when I look at boosting antioxidants and not having to just solely rely on supplements, I look at things like Terry Wall's protocol and how she healed from MS and how many vegetables she was eating each day and tasting the rainbow. So trying to replace some of the supplements with food. And that is a lot of bright, colorful, rich vegetables because they have a lot of antioxidants. So that's kind of a foundational piece. The other thing is your nervous system and stress. If you are constantly going through stress, it's really, really hard for your body to overcome that infection. So things like yoga, yoga is really great because it helps also move your lymph, and is what I see happen with EBV and autoimmune conditions in general is you're exhausted, you're achy, you have brain fog. The last thing you want to do is exercise, and that's completely understandable. But when we stop moving, our lymph can't move, and that makes it harder to heal. So things like gentle yoga and sauna to keep lymph moving, keep circulation going is really pivotal. Those pieces can be just as big as supplements. Now, supplements are important because when we get to a place of where we're at the point where autoimmune conditions are developing, usually there's a lot of inflammation in the body and there's a lot of signaling that has changed with cytokines and things like that. And supplements can help us get that under control. But what we don't want to happen is we don't want a natural approach to end up being, instead of taking a pill for this, and this, you take a natural supplement for this, and this. We want to use the supplements to support while you're getting back to feeling better and giving the body what it needs and making changes so that we can restore the body to where it is naturally doing what it does best, and your body does want to heal, because that's how your body is made. Your body really does want to thrive. It just gets bogged down, and that's why these things happen. It's not because your body is destroying you or doesn't like you, even though it feels like that sometimes. So we don't want to be stuck on supplements forever, because then what's the difference between that and being stuck on a pill forever? It might be more natural and healthier, but the goal is to make some root changes so your body can take over.
You're so right. And I remember when I had these autoimmune conditions, I looked into my genetics, and one of the markers, the SNPs, was oxidative stress related.
Yeah.
And, my methylation pathways were kind of pretty much blocked, even though I had so much vitamin B12 in my system, and it was just it wasn't absorbing in my body. So, it's interesting that you mentioned oxidative stress and antioxidants, and a lot of people, they take supplements, but they don't absorb them. So what do you suggest for them?
So the question is, why aren't they absorbing them? Because it could be, is there candida overgrowth in their gastrointestinal tract? Is it because they have low stomach acid and things aren't being broken down right? Or is it because of what you're saying, an actual biochemical process that isn't happening properly because of a SNP? So there can be multiple different reasons for that. So sometimes you need functional labs to figure out what's really going on. things like a GI map stool test or an organic acids test, where you can actually see what's going on in the gastrointestinal tract and what's going on in the mitochondria might be needed. A genetic profile where you're looking at SNPs might be needed. Those steps become important if you reach the point where you're eating healthy and you're taking a good regimen of supplements, but you're still not getting anywhere, then we have to go deeper. And with EBV, we always want to make sure that there's not mold, because mold and EBV, the reason that there's a relationship there is mold can cause your body to not be able to remember that it's already seen a virus. So Epstein-Barr virus affects B cells. Mold causes your B cells to not be able to remember. So with EBV specifically, you want to make sure that there's not mold involved. So those type of things, because mold also can lead to mycotoxins in your intestinal tract that then are disrupting that, causing leaky gut, poor absorption. So whenever we say, okay, this is happening, we have to look for, but why is it happening? Because if you have poor absorption and somebody gives you digestive enzymes, but it's not because of your stomach, it's from your gastrointestinal tract of where you're actually absorbing, then you're not going to make any headway, and you're going to be taking all these supplements and not seeing a difference.
Right. And I remember, when I had EBV, it wasn't in my GI map test. I found out it was like actually in my blood.
Yes.
And so like when the doctor had given me my results back, they're like, oh, you don't have EBV. And I'm like, okay, but I wake up like I had all these mono symptoms. And, everyone just relates those back to Hashimoto's, but I really did feel like I had EBV, and then I found out it was actually in my blood like months later. So is that like something you see often?
Where it's not showing up on the stool test, but it shows up in the blood? Uh-huh. Yeah, so the stool test, sometimes it will show up there and it's helpful, but again, it doesn't tell us like what that means or what the EBV is doing. So that's why we usually, if we're really wanting to check for EBV, we want to use the blood test.
That makes sense. And in terms of like patients you've dealt with, can you share some stories with us? Like if you've ever had Hashimoto's patients, or even people who have had autoimmune conditions and taking them from like point A to point B.
Yeah. So a lot of times what happens with autoimmune conditions is, so we have to think about it. So Hashimoto's, it's heavily affecting your thyroid. We have other conditions that are affecting different areas. But could the same thing cause all of them? I think it could, because it all is stemming from the same thing. So with Epstein-Barr viruses, what happens is it turns on pathways that are inflammatory, and that makes it more likely for these autoimmune conditions to develop. There's a research article saying that EBV correlates has been more likely to be positive in 7 different autoimmune conditions now. So Hashimoto's and beyond. So what we have to realize is that we can't just keep slapping another diagnosis on you. We need to figure out what's actually causing this inflammation. So I had one client, I do like a group coaching thing. It's like a program. And she was at the point where she had been tested for MS and had really severe brain fog and just did not know what was going on. And once we made these changes, especially with boosting antioxidants, decreasing inflammation, I mean, she was completely like, I have my life back. I can take care of my children again. I can think clearly. And And as far as I know, I'm trying to think, I don't know if I saw her follow-up EBV labs, what the titers looked like, but she was fully functioning again. When we have people with mold, it can take a lot longer. Mold resets your microbiome and your nasal cavities. You have a biofilm in here too, in your sinuses. And so mold can really cause problems with that. And actually just this past week, I spoke with someone that I had been working with, I think for 10 months or so now. People, sometimes they move out of a moldy building, they move into one that has mold. It can be so difficult. But one thing that was an obstacle there was the mold and healing from it, and brain fog and gastrointestinal problems. And they had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, had all sorts of autoimmune type symptoms, but hadn't been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition yet. And now she is feeling awesome, saying that she wakes up in the morning and is ready to go and ready to do things. Another big thing that I see that is a sign that people are really healing, especially with Epstein-Barr virus, is when they say, I feel ready to exercise, I can exercise, and I don't feel awful after I exercise. So with Epstein-Barr virus and autoimmune conditions, exercise can become an added oxidative stress to the body, or something that the body can't handle. So is what we will see is there's actually a term for it called post-exertional malaise. And you might feel flu-like or ill for like a week after a simple workout.
Wow.
And so that happens a lot with Epstein-Barr virus and autoimmune conditions. So when we get to the point where people are not only feeling more energy, but then they're able to go exercise and put a stressor on their body, and they feel good afterwards, that's when we know that we've really done some healing for them.
That's incredible. So, like, when people come to you, do you ever look into their genetics, or are some people just more susceptible to these, like the activation of these, than others?
I think it's a combination of things. With genetics, so it's like genetics load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger. So you could have predisposed things that might make it more likely. And for some people, so there are certain strains of Epstein-Barr virus that infect different immune cells that make it a lot more aggressive. But the Epstein-Barr virus that we see, where you're fatigued and you're just kind of always like that, and this common thing that we're seeing happen a lot right now, that one is usually more, I don't want to say mild, because it is not mild or fun to go through, but it's not that extreme where in a couple years, you're predisposed to cancer or something like that. That's a really aggressive form. And there definitely are times where genetics and how your immune system is with your blood and the way it responds to things is, and it's much more severe. For a lot of people, they might have SNPs with detox pathways like you're talking about, but there's a lot of SNPs upstream of the MTHFR that have to be looked at. So that can be a contributing factor. But if it is SNPs, the other thing that we have to consider is that epigenetics can change, right? So when you were, your grandmother had you in her when she was pregnant with your mom, and you have things passed from her that were patterns that turned on methylation, these little methylation groups and signalings that are in you that were based on her decisions and how she ate. And you are born with that. But how you eat and how you live your life, you can turn those methylation groups on or off. So sometimes these SNPs can actually change. And that's why when we look at MTHFR, we also want to look upstream And sometimes when we repair and give the body what it needs, those signaling factors can also go back to a stronger place. There are some that are just actually you were born this way and they're not as plastic or changeable as that, but some of them are.
That's good to know, because I think that a lot of people, blame it on their genetics, but I kind of had, I mean, when I looked at my genetics, I'm like, wow, like I should be in the hospital right now with so many different things. And it was just crazy because, like you said, when you're exposed to mold, like you have inflammation, especially in your sinus area. And that's where I would feel it first. Like if I was allergic to something, like even going into a room where people are smoking, I would feel it first in my sinuses versus any other area.
Yeah.
So, and that's just like what you said. And like we live in a world where, we have these, unfortunately, have all these environmental toxins that we can't really avoid or control. I wish we could, but maybe, the way things are going, things will, air pollution wise, things will get better. But what do you suggest for people that, like can't really control their environment?
Yeah. So you mean, do you mean they don't have access to like organic foods, or they're stuck in mold? What do you mean by they can't control their environment?
Meaning like, people travel, people like live in the city or wherever they may live. It's not like, and you can go on a road trip, you go on
Mhm.
vacations, people can't really control what they experience on the beach or, somewhere they're at a restaurant or something like that, so what do you suggest?
Yeah, so focus on what you can control. So if you live in the city, even if you don't, depending on what your air quality is, there's things like air filters. Make sure that you are using one that is really good. IntelliPure or Air Doctor are better. IntelliPure is really good for clean air, especially with mold. If when it comes to mitigating toxins, if you can go organic, that really helps with cutting down on toxins because we still are dealing with the pesticides that are sprayed on fruits and vegetables, and glyphosate hasn't been completely banned or anything like that. It still is in things. You can go on to ewg.org, which is Environmental Working Group, and they have a list of fruits and vegetables that are less likely to have pesticides and ones that you really want to make sure that you get organic if you can. Water is also another possibility for toxins. So if you can get a Berkey filter or something like that to filter your water, there's all sorts of things, even heavy metals that can be in our water that we might not know about, that might be okay with standards, but really aren't great for our health. So those are kind of like core things that you can do if you're traveling and whatnot. Again, that's kind of something that is more out of your control. So all you can do is your best. But if you on your everyday daily basis are doing these things and eating a very high nutrient diet where you can have meat, but if the greater percentage of what you're eating is plant-based with high oxidants and helping you detox, then when you do travel and you are exposed to things, you can better handle it. And your bucket is already lower, so you can handle more and your body can clear that out. Making sure that you're having regular bowel movements and staying hydrated are two things that we just don't do very well, myself included. And they're huge. Like that is literally how you are removing toxins from your body. So if that's not happening, you're not having at least one regular bowel movement per day, and you're not getting half your weight in ounces of water, then that has to be fixed before we're talking about supplements or anything, or else it's just kind of silly because that is so important. So those are things that might seem really basic, but are huge, especially when you do them every day.
You're so right. Yeah, and for the sake of time, I know we're almost like out of time here. I can't believe it went by so fast, but um, maybe you can just share like your three biggest takeaways and anything that, like, I know we talked about mold, EBV, we went into the diet and supplements and so many
Mhm.
different things and how all these things relate to autoimmune conditions. And a lot of people, because the conventional ways don't really go into these things and really, I mean, my conventional doctor, like if I told him like I'm allergic to mold, he would probably laugh at me. And
Mhm.
and same with like EBV, like they don't really take any of this stuff seriously, it seems like. So what are your like three biggest takeaways when it comes to autoimmune conditions and these infections?
Yeah, so the first thing that I always tell people is to remember that their body has an innate ability to heal and that your body is working for you. So when you first are diagnosed or you're really sick and you're having all these symptoms, when you can reframe it to realize that these symptoms are your body trying to tell you what exactly is going on, that it needs help with, then you can start to be more in tune with your body and understand what needs to happen and move forward. Uh, Two, continue to advocate for yourself, because if something doesn't feel right, it's not. And so if you once you start to trust yourself more, again, you'll be more aware of your surroundings. So you'll notice, like, we downplay symptoms all the time. I hear every day people say, well, I'm tired or I have a headache, but it's just because of XYZ. And it's like, no, you have a headache or you're feeling fatigued, and that's real, and that's not just because of life. There's something real there. So you'll become more able to really connect with your body and understand what's going on. And finally, then be ready to make changes. So it might seem like a small change. Say you're just adding in 2 servings of vegetables to dinner. Is that really going to make a difference? But when you start to make those small changes, when you then also are maybe you're taking just a few anti-inflammatory supplements, maybe then you're doing yoga once per day. If you can do yoga just starting for 10 minutes in the morning each day, pretty soon you'll be doing yoga for 30, 45 minutes every day, and you'll be starting to build muscle again. And muscle is fire for your immune system. It's awesome. So those little tiny changes that seem like, how is this actually going to help me get my life back and get my health back? When you start adding them in more and more, you will be so amazed at the progress that happens. But it's all about consistency and having faith that those changes really will make a difference. And even with just how our society is, we feel like we need a pill to cure us or make a difference. We don't think that that's medicine or that's a cure, but that is progress, and it will make a difference.
That's so true. Yeah, a lot of people just take a lot of different supplements and eat a clean diet, but they don't really sleep 8 hours a day or,
Yeah,
really look at their bowel movement, see if they're even going every day. And yeah, for me, like that was key to be able to detox my body on, like you said, a daily basis. Because otherwise, how can things absorb?
right,
Right.
right.
So, thank you so much for like sharing your story and being here and sharing all this amazing insight with us. And I know that it's going to help many of the women in this group. And if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yep, you can go to my website. It's www.drkaseyholland.com. Mm-hmm.
Great. And yeah, and also follow on Instagram. I mean, you have some amazing insight on there as well.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad it's helpful.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for being on the show today, and I hope to have you back soon. I know a lot of the women are probably looking into like getting tested now for EBV and see how they can help themselves and get rid of this. But I think it's like you said, it's a lifestyle change and it's all encompassing. It's not just a single supplement.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.